Good afternoon, everybody. It's a warm day, but with any luck, we will stay cool. This is going to be a very interesting afternoon. Is it on?
Put it a little closer to it.
I'm right on top of it.
That's good.
This should be a very interesting experience for all of us, because we're going to hear some stories that are not like stories that we hear about our relatives in Western culture. And I think you're going to be really fascinated by it. Our title, Whose Mission, does indicate very strongly that there were many reasons for the Foreign Mission School. The intention of its founders to perhaps extinguish the cultures of the peoples who came here. Was that fair? Probably not. We know that today. But what was it for them? It's a very interesting perspective to think about this interesting part of our past. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy Brecker, who's a board member and longtime historian around and about in Connecticut. And he will introduce the speakers and moderate the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. And I want to thank our chairperson, Lisa, and the board members of the Historical Society. The person who put this event together is Jamie Cantoni. She's not here now, but she's hopefully will arrive soon. She's the curator and executive director of the museum and of the Historical Society. And I especially want to thank all of you, and especially those of you who have come from many different parts of the world to be here for this event. 200 years ago, the Foreign Mission School was founded in Cornwall to teach youths from around the globe to become Christian missionaries in their own lands. Surely it is extraordinary that a school founded 200 years ago that lasted barely a decade and had barely 100 students in its entire history should even be remembered today, let alone receive the kind of commemoration we've had this weekend. As the Cornwall Historical Society discussed what we could contribute to that commemoration, it occurred to us that each of those from around the world who came to the Foreign Mission School came with their own mission, rooted in their own background. And that when they returned home, each pursued their own missions there. And it occurred to us that each of those coming to this commemoration had their own mission in coming and their own interpretation of the meaning of the Foreign Mission School. So we decided the best contribution we could make was to encourage a variety of people linked to the Foreign Mission School in one way or another to share their very different takes on the school and its significance. We have titled this colloquium, Whose Mission? Because we believe that in fact, many people connected with the school, both in the past and today, had their own missions in relation to it, and that we could all benefit from learning about those missions from each other. The students from around the world, there must be page 3 here somewhere. Excuse me. The students from around the world who came to the Foreign Mission School 2 centuries ago must have brought with them an amazing array of worldviews, philosophies, and cultural constructs, contrasting with each other's as well as those of their Cornwall hosts. As we commemorate the 200th anniversary of the school, we are honored to share diverse perspectives from the communities to which Foreign Mission School students return. Communities which continue to preserve and pass on both traditions derived from the school and those of their home places. Some of these may at first seem surprising, to those of other backgrounds and cultures, but they allow us an opportunity to learn something about each other's experiences and beliefs, and perhaps something about what it must have been like for the original foreign mission school students to encounter and live with such diversity. We have 5 speakers today, and we want to make sure we save time for questions. So we've asked all the speakers to say within 20 minutes, and to make sure they do, we have our disciplinarian, and Schillinger, who is also a leading local scholar on the history of the Foreign Mission School, who at the end of 20 minutes is going to ding a ding and give a wrap-up, wind-up signal, and 2 minutes after that, she will gong the gong. So with nothing more that needs to be said, I'd like to introduce Nicholas Bellantoni, who will be our first speaker, professor at the University of Connecticut, state archaeologist for Connecticut for decades, and a critical figure.
I'm not that old.
Well, I understand that he has been doing excavations in the state of Connecticut for more than 40 years.
I guess I am that old.
And there's no more ado than this. This whole weekend has been, this whole weekend has been so visually and culturally brightened by the many gifts and ways that have been brought here.
It has been a wonderful weekend, and I really congratulate everyone that's been involved in organizing all of the events. It's been really fabulous, and especially to the descendants of the Foreign Mission School students who have come here, as Jeremy said, from literally around the world. And a special shout out to our Opakahia Ohana is their family. And I really appreciate how much they have accepted me and honored me as a part of them. I'm just very humbled and appreciative of all of that. First of all, let me just preface this to say I am not a historian. I'm not going to give you a history of the Foreign Mission School. Others will do that. I am what I consider a dirt archaeologist. That is to say, I get to history by getting my hands dirty, getting in the ground, and excavating artifacts that help us interpret that past. It's another way to get to history. And along with the historic documents, it really, and oral traditions, it represents the universe of what we'll ever know of our individual past or collective past. And so I'm coming at it from a different way than some of the other speakers, but I think that's what the greatness of this group of speakers are, will give you a different interpretation. But I was involved with 2 major projects in town. The first, obviously, is the repatriation of Henry Opakahia and a geophysical search, that is ground-penetrating radar, for the actual position of the Foreign Mission School on the green across the street from where we are. So I'm going to basically talk about those 2 projects. If you do not know who Henry Opakahia is, shame on you. Because he is so important, not only to this town and the Foreign Mission School, but certainly to the people of Hawaii to this day. He is the first student of the Foreign Mission School, and really, in many respects, the inspiration of the Foreign Mission School. Samuel Mills Jr. Felt that Opakahia was brought here purposely by God to start a mission effort to go back to Hawaii with the gospel. And that, of course, was his dream. To tell you his whole story is enormous, and we really don't have to take, and I'll pull the plug before I can even get to the archaeology. But we do want to just simply state that he is of such profound influence. He was a scholar. He was interpreting Genesis from the original Hebrew into a phonetic Hawaiian alphabet that he created, just like Sequoia with the Cherokee. He was an amazing man, tremendous intellect, and beloved. His personality, his humor was loved by all here. And so his goal, his dream was to bring the gospel to Hawaii and be a missionary. Unfortunately, while he is here, he contracts typhus fever, is forced to abandon his studies. But when he is on his deathbed, two things. He understands he is dying, and he gives over to the will of God, that God will do what is right. But he does lament, oh, how I want to see Hawaii, how I want to go back. But unfortunately, he is unable to do so. He will die on February 17th, and his death is a Christian example of death. He dies in Christ, and they say with a smile on his face, his pain relieved. He is buried in Cornwall Ct Cemetery the next day. Back then, before embalming, the funeral and the burial would be the next day. And he's utilized by Lyman Beecher, from one of the founders of the Foreign Mission School and the board, the American board. And we bury him with his dust and all our high hopes of his future activity in the cause of God. Christ, in the cause of Christ. After he dies, Edwin Dwight, who was his mentor and actually the first intern president for or instructor, I should say, for the Foreign Mission School, would publish the memoirs. And that has been reprinted to this day. It's been translated into 3 or 4 different languages, and it is the hallmark of Henry's story. And it has raised funds for the Foreign Mission School and the foreign missions for 200 years. So his influence is profound. He is an intellect, a scholar. He is considered the first Christianized native Hawaiian. He convinced, I don't want to say cold, but conservative Calvinist New Englanders that indigenous people had the intellectual capability of comprehending the Bible. Back then, it was debated. Why contribute to a foreign mission school? Why contribute to foreign missions if salvation could not be given? Because they could not comprehend it. He was the example that could in fact happen. He toured New England and gave sermons that influenced so many people to go into their pocketbooks and contribute to what happened here. He is the inspiration. And he is the inspiration. He is the wind that billowed the sails of the Thaddeus on its way to Hawaii in October 1819. He is that inspiration. And he influences abolitionism here in New England by his example. And of course, he brings education and the gospel to Hawaii. Very profound. And in 1993, the Opakahaya descendants, the family, started an association based on Deborah Lilipeka Lee, who is with us today, that had an inspiration that came to her at night, a feeling she could not ignore that Henry wanted to come home. And as a result, that started the repatriation process. As the state archaeologist, I was given the responsibility of the hopefully professional and respectful disinterment of Henry's remains, and the forensic identification that it was in fact Henry Opakahia that we were returning home. So I have to tell you, when I got the charge and I said, absolutely, I would agree to help the family and do this, I had no idea who Henry Opakahia was. And I started to do some research. And those were in the days before the internet. I actually had to use a library. And I started to do some work to find out who this man was that was returning home. And serendipitously, a friend of mine who I had told about this project had just purchased in an antique bookstore the memoirs, the first edition, 1819 memoirs of Henry Opakahia. And he gave it to me to read. And for the first time, I realized the significance of what I was being involved with and what Henry's life was all about. So when I came to the cemetery to prepare for the exhumation, I came with John McDonald. Some of you will remember, know John. Him and Nancy still live in the town. I got to reunite with him yesterday, which was such a thrill. And he brought me to the cemetery. And as I was coming up the hill where Opukahia is buried, I started looking for his name on these vertical tombstones, looking for Opukahia, so I knew where we were going to be working. And I couldn't find it. And finally John said, no, come up the hill. And as I went further up the hill, I saw this stone table, this stone memorial. And at first I dismissed it. I figured it was some minister, somebody important in the Anglo community, because they were the only ones that got stone tables like this. And he pointed and said, this is Opukahia. And I was completely blown away, because you don't see this for a man of color in New England at that time. This is extraordinary. And the other part of what I was seeing was the beads and the leis and the coins and the food. And I said to John, I said, what is this all about? And he said to me, you know, when Hawaiians come to the Northeast, many times they go pilgrimage to Cornwall and pay their respects to Henry and leave offerings. And I was totally blown away. I didn't expect a shrine. And yet here it was in Cornwall, Connecticut, dedicated to a native Hawaiian. And so as I'm going through this, I'm realizing how significant Henry is, not just in history, but today, and to not only his family, but to all Hawaiians, and I think the people of Cornwall and the state of Connecticut. So we worked to, first of all, having to remove this stone monument. Now, a couple of things about the monument. It's not hollow. There's stone inside it, and it's very well built. Working with the Cemetery Association, we not only had to remove this, and hopefully there was a burial under it, because at this point we don't know. And he was buried quickly, and then the monument came later. Whether it was actually over his remains or not remained questioned. So we had to deal with it. This monument, as you all know, is on a very steep bank. It's sandy, loose soil, prone to erosion. And the fact that it has maintained itself for 200 years is because underneath this monument were 3 levels of solid foundation that went below the frost line. This is extremely well built and was built to last a long, long time. Okay? So very impressive as we're going through this in terms of Henry. When we came down through and removed the foundation of the monument, we started seeing soil colorations that were indicative of a grave shaft. And then before long, we saw a line appear. And you could trace that. That is the hexagonal coffin. And you're looking at the sideboards that are completely decomposed, completely gone. Now, I'm not going to show you any of the remains of Henry Opukahia out of respect for the family and for Henry himself. But let me tell you this. When we did find him, as we were coming down, I remember telling Debbie Lee and others, the first thing I came on was the forehead. Because as you lay supine in a grave, the highest part is your forehead. And with my brush, I removed a patch of earth about the size of a 50-cent piece. And I recognized it. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to be the first person in 175 years to see the face of Henry Opukahia. And at that point, it was very moving for me. His remains were in the best state of organic preservation I have ever seen in any skeleton of this age in Connecticut soil. Connecticut has very acidic soils. That means to say organic remains like bone and wood dissolve very quickly. I've had to deal with 20th century graves where everything was gone. No trace of the body is there. But Henry was in beautiful shape, only a few small bones. Even the bones of the fingers were all intact. And he was laying on his back in an east-west orientation in a praying position with his hands folded over his waist. And he was facing east. And that, of course, with Christian theology, on the day of resurrection, Christ will come up with the sun out of the east and draw you from your housing And so he's laying prepared for the day of resurrection to rise with Christ. The only signs of health issues were some lesions on his ribs that were associated with the typhus fever that he had suffered, pulmonary, in the last months of his life. And his teeth had no caries, no decay, and they were straight. I was quite envious, actually. But he was, I've never seen to this day a skeleton remain so well preserved. And you know, I searched for scientific answers for that, explanations, in lieu of that, I like to think that Henry was simply waiting for his family to take him home. And he presented, not a very scientific point of view, but I like to think that he was waiting for his family to take him home. We found a couple of very interesting objects, if you will, or artifacts, I should say, associated with the coffin. The first were brass tacks, and when we mended them together, what we were looking at is the headboard of the coffin. It was painted black. It is of hardwood, a very strong coffin, but with the weight pressure, it split down the middle with decomposition. And what they had done back then is they took brass tacks, small little tacks, and they hammered the initials H.O., Henry Bucaya, Latin A.E. for age of 26, and surrounded in a heart motif, a sign of Christian endearment. I had seen brass tacks on coffins before this time period. I had never seen a heart motif around it. Again, a sign of such endearment, not of the people of Cornwall back then. This is an extremely expensive coffin for its time period, a state-of-the-art coffin. He also had a viewing glass on the lid, and that viewing glass allowed you to view his face during the funeral without having to lift the whole coffin. This is state-of-the-art funeral technology in the early 19th century. No expense was spared to give Henry a memorial that would last all of his life. And by the way, the family took these back with them and have reburied them in his coffin back on Hawaii at Kealakekua Bay. Right across the street at the First United Church of Christ Congregational in July of 25th. Once we had done the forensic work, now I have to explain that just for a moment because, you know, the court orders from the state and everything, we had to be sure we had Henry Opukai and we couldn't just send anybody home. And so clearly the forensic analysis, there was no question that this matched up everything we knew about Henry. And there was a wonderful church service, probably the most colorful congregational church service ever in New England, where Debbie and many, including David Morano, spoke about the aspects of Henry's life and his return home. The family arranged for a tour of 2 weeks of Oahu, as well as the Big Island where Henry was born. His casket was put on a double-rigged canoe from the place of refuge to Kealakekua Bay, where he left from, and swam out to an American sealing ship by the name of the Triumph. And he is buried today, reburied at Kahiakulu, the Congregational Church in Napupu at Kealakekua Bay. His monument, my wife and I had the opportunity in 2013 to go back and reunited with Debbie, but also Debbie gave us instruction how to get to various places on the island that were associated with Henry's life. And of course, I had been wanting for 20 years to come and pay my respects to Henry in his new burial, but to see his beautiful memorial. What the family did is recreated that stone table in black volcanic rock, so that the imagery is absolutely the same. And looking over Kealakekua Bay, from which he would leave the islands. It's a beautiful monument. Any of you get to Hawaii, please stop and see Henry. It's from Cornwall. You need to go see it because it's so marvelous. And of course, today the stone has been restored. That was one of the requirements of the Cemetery Association, and the family put a plaque saying, "Oh, how I want to see Hawaii." And many of you have seen this up there. basically telling the story of his remains, returning home to his family, in his death wish to return to Hawaii, and being grateful to everyone who has cared for him over the years. So it still maintains itself as a shrine in a very important place. So Henry was the first student of the Foreign Mission School, and one of the things I became interested in when I came to town back many years ago was, does the Foreign Mission School, still exist? Obviously it doesn't stand anymore, but can we locate where it was? And so I developed a project using basically this photograph very importantly as a model, because when you look at it, you don't see any shadows. It's probably taken either at noon or possibly with shadows extending in the back. When you look, you can see a slight rise here in a stone foundation and sheds and structures in the back. And that kind of keyed me that I believe the photograph is facing west. So it's taken from what would be today the green, looking up at the Foreign Mission School. You can see the students went to school here on the bottom floor, and they lived in probably very tight quarters up on the second floor. Today there's a plaque there, and we received permission from Pastor Robert Poole of the St. Peter's Lutheran Chapel Church to conduct ground-penetrating radar around the area of the church and the green in looking for the Foreign Mission School. We used old maps, and at that time, the Foreign Mission School, the Congregational Church, was located right across the street at the corner here. It was later moved to its present position on Boltonville Road. And you can see the Stewart's house here, the stone house where Henry died here. This is a 1852 map, Beers map of the Cornwall. By this time, the Foreign Mission School is referred to as the academy. And of course, by this time, the Foreign Mission School is no longer in operation. The congregations of the church has moved across the street. So using these as a model, we went across the street to the green. And with it, we conducted what we call ground-penetrating radar survey. This is non-intrusive. We didn't dig. All we had to do was run a sled over the ground in a consistent grid fashion. And what ends up happening, you can see Debbie Sarabian, our technician, as she's moving, she's getting a printed readout, or I should say a digital readout of what's below ground. Ground-penetrating radar is simply a short radio wave that goes into the ground from a transmitting antenna, comes back to a receiving antenna, and it measures basically soil disturbances. We've used this a great deal for trying to locate unmarked graves in old cemeteries, ancient burial grounds in Connecticut. Not everybody got a tombstone, and we talked to Ann about possibly coming back to the cemetery to do similar things. But it also will reflect features, foundations that are below ground. And so looking at that, we did our survey. We divided the green into 3 long rectangular grids, and from there we did our scans. And this gobbledygook is what it looks like. But basically what the radar allows us to do is slice and dice the image. We can slice it horizontally at different levels, and we can slice it vertically. Trying to get images of disturbances, as you see marked in red here. This major disturbance we hit around 70 centimeters, not that deep. Whoop, there goes my bell. And you can see it here in profile. This is all disturbance. This is natural soil. We believe this is the foundation or the remnants of the first congregational church. Yeah. So it does lead, the remnants of that church, even though it's been moved, are still in the ground there. We hit in grid 3 a rectangular disturbance. And you can see it, well, whether you can or not, right here in the vertical grid. And we believe this might be the remnant of the Kellogg's General Store that sat behind the Foreign Mission School. We did not get any radar anomalies or markings where the Foreign Mission School was situated. My belief, and probably most of you, believe it is actually on the footprint of the Lutheran Church Chapel. However, as a result of that, though, it is possible, with the permission of the Lutheran Church and Reverend Poole, Pastor Poole, for us to do some test excavations around where it was. And chances are we may be lucky enough to find artifacts associated with the Foreign Mission School. We've done schools before, and we find lead pencils, slates, desk parts, It is possible to retrieve actual artifacts. And also, the Congregational Church, we might find structural elements even though churches don't provide a lot of artifacts. But what intrigues me also is Kellogg's General Store, because the Cornwall Historical Society has the ledgers of that store. We know what was being sold, who was buying it, and comparing that to the archaeological record of artifacts recovered might be a very interesting way to get back to that history. So, I would say there's a great deal of archaeological potential out here. And maybe we don't have to do it, but you know what? I just like to come back to Cornwall.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, thanks so much. And our next speaker is Karen Sanchez-Epler, who is a professor of American Studies and English at Amherst College. And I'm going to deliver her some water because speaking up here is dry work. Do you want to use the podium?
I actually brought this in the paper, but I got away. Awesome. Thank you. That's so wonderful. It's so marvelous to be here today and to be sharing these celebrations of this weekend, especially with the ancestors of students at the school. The Hawaiian and Cherokee students have left a better known history. But part of what was so remarkable about this school is that it had students from all over the world. And what I'm going to do today is talk to you about one student that really all we don't know, his descendants, if he had any. We don't know what happened to him after 1835. But we do have one artifact of that's left at the Foreign Mission School, which is this album, a school book. And it's an extraordinary thing. It is most likely the earliest literary production by a Chinese American person in the United States. Pictures from it are on the wall in the Historical Society, and there's a lovely reproduction of the whole book that you can leaf through. So it's a really extraordinary object, and one that not only can expand what we know about Cornwall, but also can change how we think about and understand that whose mission question that is structuring our talks today. That is to help us to think some about what the students were doing at the school and getting out of their time here, not just what the missionaries were intending for them. It also just really radically changes the history we have of Chinese in America. Most of the narratives we tell about Chinese people in the United States starts in the 1850s, starts on the West Coast. But we of course knew that there were Chinese people who came to the East Coast of the United States from much earlier. We have some evidence about them. This is the only thing written by one of them that we have. So it's a really extraordinary document. And as you can tell, it looks like an everyday school book. You can still, in a way, get paper-bound cheap books like this to do exercises in, composition exercises, good American poultry on the cover. Inside, it looks rather different. So this is the first spread, and it was a friendship album made for Miss Cherry Stone, and then signed down here done by your friend, Chinese youth, Henry Martin, and then writing in Chinese characters. And a colleague of mine at Amherst College helped me to translate the Chinese writing in this album. So what it reads there is done by Yulan, if you use the Mandarin pronunciation, or Wulan, if you pronounce the name as he would have pronounced it in Cantonese, from the Wangpu or Whampoa village, Guangdong province, that is Canton. Whampoa is about 12 miles outside of Canton proper. It's a port city on the Pearl River. Canton was the only part of China that was open to foreign trade at that time, so not an expected place in a way for him to come from. He's making this for Cherry Stone. We believe Timothy Stone's daughter, though Cherry's a nickname, so it's a little hard to make sure, but I think she's Mary Stone. And friendship albums are a form kind of a cross between an autograph book and a commonplace book, a collection of poems and writings, drawings, but also used as a gift, so with a signature on each page from different students. And this one includes signatures from George Fox, a Seneca, William Lum, a little boy of Chinese youth, your friend, Charles Arankia, a native of Hawaii, and actually there are a few. David Raynard has a page in this book, so there are a number of Hawaii and Native American students, Choctaw, Cherokee, who have pages in this book. The book also includes a poem about the mission school. This was a poem that we have in this full long version from a publication in 1822, something called A Journey Around New England, that talked about different exciting sights you could see in New England, including visiting Cornwall and seeing the Cornwall Seminary. I'll read it for you. Now in Connecticut there stands on Cornwall's low and pleasant lands a school composed of foreign youth for propagating gospel truth. And on this consecrated ground are those from many nations round, but mostly of the Cherokees, the Anglos, and Owahis. The languages are now 13. 12 nations here are likewise seen. That's where the poem ends, as Henry Martin or Wulan copies it into this album with, of course, his own drawing of what the school looked like. The poem, as it's published in 1822, that is 2 years before the making of this 1824 album, has another few lines. And students 32 are found from regions of remotest bound, but charity's propitious hand, which traversed o'er sea and land to seek for good and lend her care, has brought these various nations here. One of the things I'm interested in is how something like this school book, this school exercise, that in lots of ways seems to be simply doing the work of assimilation, copy out Christian poetry, say your docility to this mission cause, also can give us some little visions of the students' own interests, ideas, thoughts, perhaps resistance or at least complexity to that mission. So it seems interesting to me that in making this album, there's still space at the bottom of the page. He could have put the whole poem in there if he wanted to, without a lot of squishing. He didn't. He stopped after the description of who was at the school and before saying anything about Charity's propitious hand bringing people there. So the mission piece of how these students got there gets left out of this book, out of this poem, and he puts it into the book. So I think a lot with listening to Nick's talk about how much the work of making sense of a document like this is like that archaeological work of trying to figure out what the human things that were happening beneath this page, these stones. We're lucky in Cornwall because even though it was such a short 9 years that the school was in operation, it was such a momentous experiment that it was extremely well covered in the missionary press in particular, the evangelical press in particular. So I was able to find 30 articles just about this young man coming to the school, and another 30 that refer to him in one way or another. But we can see that Chinese people came to the school from as early, these two pieces actually all three pieces, but these two from 1819 show that already in the very first years of the school, there were students from China here. Wang RC, who didn't stay very long, and Joseph Boateng Snow, who, if you can read in this account of the exhibitions in 1819, was responsible for teaching one of the white New England students in the school Chinese in order to prepare him to be a missionary to go to China. And Joseph Boateng Snow was a Malaysian man who had first worked in Canton and then been on merchant ships and then ends up in Rhode Island and then in Cornwall. This sense of extraordinary global networks is just so rich on the ground here. Also, as you saw in the first pages of the album, there's a lot of Chinese writing in the album. The school in some ways is supporting that. It's wanting to prepare these students to go back to be missionaries in their own country, and that means to maintain their language skills. So it's interestingly different than other mission schools in the mission field, which are often devoted to really eradicating people's own histories and languages. But because this school was training students to become missionaries themselves, as well as Christianizing them, it was interested in having them maintain language skills. And parts of the exhibitions were indeed to have students perform in their native languages as well as in English. Oh, I have one more thing I was going to read to you. So I do, in the Mission Press, have a longish article I'm going to read to you that describes Henry Wulan coming to Cornwall. They are cousins. Their ages are 19 and 21. The younger, which is William Alum, left China about 2 years ago in a vessel for Amsterdam, from which place he arrived in this country in February. The elder, that's Alam, Wulan, arrived in this country direct from China about 2 months ago. Neither had any knowledge of the destination of the other to this country until the arrival of the elder in Philadelphia, when they accidentally met in the streets. They are cousins to the Chinese youth now in the school at Cornwall, had heard of his arrival in the Boston country and that he was receiving an education there, and felt a great desire to be taught also. They arrived in this country friendless and penniless. The younger lived with the supercargo of the ship in which he came from Amsterdam. The elder supported himself by making small toys, which he sold in the streets of Philadelphia, in which business he was engaged when he was accidentally met by a gentleman from the state of New York, who was attending the meeting of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church. Upon being asked, principally by signs, whether he would like to be taught to read the English language, he immediately signified his desire and appeared highly gratified with the idea, and informed the gentleman that he had a cousin in the city The gentlemen then took steps to bring their case before the Christian public. Nearly $300 were immediately collected, and more will doubtless be. On Thursday evening, they were presented to the inhabitants of Hartford in the brick meeting house, dressed in their native costume. They read to the audience from the New Testament, translated into the Chinese language by Dr. Morrison. A handsome collection was made for the school, and they left this place for Cornwall. Such an interesting account. So many details. So many things that it's clear the newspaper doesn't understand. Surely they weren't actually cousins, but this sense that all Chinese people must be related. And also the sense, I think, between the young men that someone from your country feels like kin when you encounter them, and the streets of Philadelphia are real. That sense that literacy education is both what the Presbyterian outreach suspects might be desirable, right? Not Christian education, literacy education, and that's what these young men assent to is also an important piece here. It says that they were penniless. Goodness, all right, I'm way worse than I was, never mind. But clearly, they were, in fact, extremely well educated. High literacy skills in Chinese and enormously well connected. That is, the supercargo of a ship is the person in charge of the economic arrangements, not someone, not just a sailor laughing. Right? That these are like the Ridge family, like Pakahia or Tamari, these are really sons of elite families from their native countries. I'm going to skip that one just to say, and we'll hear more about this, that there was quite a bit of early 19th century displays of Chinese people. But we know almost nothing about those people except for their display quality, right? We don't even know Afan Moy's real name. We only, of course, know Wulan's real name because he signed this album himself. The Siamese twins, the Bunker Brothers, who you may well have heard of, Ing and Cheng, we don't know their real names either, and have no words from either of these people, even though they were major press sensations at the time. What we have from Wulan is this album. It contains things like the Lord's Prayer in Chinese and in English, that grid of opposite visions running against each other, but also bits of Chinese aesthetic. And part of the exhibit of Moy is also to say there's such an aesthetic attraction to Chinese things. Lots of market for that in the U.S. The album also includes botanical drawings which show a more New England aesthetic, or here, flowers by the southern window. Some of these kinds of graveyard markers in the graveyard here. The Gold family has one. But also sometimes things that seem strangely disproportional. You can have a sense of culture clash on the page with a picture like this. So I'm going to just wrap up pretty quickly. I'm sure I'm going to go over a tiny bit, but this is a page by another student here, William Alum, who you just heard about his arrival. There's a little bit of writing in Chinese in the bottom that says, a poem written clumsily, offered as a memento to your charming person. It's a little bit of flirtation going on here. And indeed, that Chinese lady in the front, if you read the Chinese, says that she's Lui Jin Ha, who's a heroine in Chinese opera. Her fame in Chinese opera is as a noble lady falling in love with a poor student. So nobody who only reads English, who sees this album, would see anything except for these Chinese ladies, he writes in English. But he knows who he's drawing and why. And the last page of the album has a direct address to Miss Cherry Stone. I won't read the English to you because I'm late, but it's sort of, I will miss you and thank you for bringing me to Christ kind of message. But then on the second page, here, he writes in Chinese, and this is what he writes: "My constant heart tolerates suffering. I will never forget in my heart of hearts your beautiful face. Today I leave with this image of you. One should not hold on to the passage of time, but once the image of the flower is gone, I will come to you again." And I don't know how well you can see it in this slide, but you can see this little bit of a shadow around her here. That's the shadow from that black paint. When you close this album, they kiss. Lovely. We don't know whether Cherry Stone knows what that says. She might only know the "thank you for bringing me to Christ" part. We don't know how much he told her what he was putting in this album he gave her. But we know that that story is there underneath the story of Christianity. And I will skip that one too, but I will say that I was able to find him back in China in 1835, when he's not having anything to do with mission people, but he is using his English language skills to be a successful merchant. And that capacity to take what he's gotten here and make his own uses of it is, I think, probably true of all the extraordinarily young men who were students at this school.
Thank you so much. It both captured dimensions of what the foreign mission school experience meant, and also very much what our heart relation is after all these decades and 2 centuries to the people who were here. And our next speaker is Kawa Noe Kumanawanu. And how did I do? Do you want to correct? When we talk about the people not knowing each other's languages and having to learn them in the mission school, we're having that today 200 years later too. And I just want to say that she is a burial sites specialist for the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources, and much, much more than that, which she will explain.
So I push the middle button?
The middle, the side one, the arrow.
The left.
Go front and back. Yeah.
Okay. Aloha. Aloha. Mahalo. Happy Father's Day. It is Father's Day today, and 38 years ago I was born. And however, 38 years ago it was on a Saturday. Well, it was on a Sunday, but this year it's on a Saturday. But it's marked as Father's Day 1979. So unfortunately I was born with a sickness that wasn't discovered until 10 days later. And they had found an unknown grapefruit-sized tumor in my abdominal area. And today, my parents were young. When I did realize the scar, which lies hip to hip on top of my belly, at an adolescent age, I realized the scar, and I had a few questions that I had to ask about that. And my parents were unsuccessful in answering those questions. So I went and researched my own medical records and discovered it was an unknown mass, and they had removed it from my body at 10 days of old, leaving me with a scar from hip to hip. Opu in Hawaiian means your abdominal area, your tummy, near your na'au, where you hold the things that will feed you life. Kaha'ia is to cut directly across the belly. So unfortunately, I was born with that 38 years ago today. So in reflection 200 years later, as I find myself, I come from the Mayflower. So, left side, right side?
Right. One side.
Right side.
Got advice?
No, not my department.
It's better not take time off of mine. Okay, so this was my journey right here, and I'm just going to start with one of my latest ancestors, Dr. Ralph Cudworth. Dr. Ralph Cudworth was amazing in 1572. He had got all the degrees necessary to become a vicar to the King James at that time. In court, he had found the nurse, which is also a descendant of the monarchy, all the way to William the Conqueror and all those wonderful women. There's a lot of women. We got Spain, and that's a whole other thing. So carrying on, he marries the nurse to Prince Henry and has these two brothers that I'm going to talk about today, Ralph Cudworth and James Cudworth. Ralph Cudworth led on and became one of the Cambridge Platonists. And that was really exciting for him because that took on the Puritans and Quakers that are now, will have come to Plymouth Rock. So I wanted you to kind of look and see a few items. I come from 4 gentlemen off of the Mayflower. There's a few names, they branch off, but I wanted to make sure we get to me and stay on track because there's so many people. Here we go. So Ralph Cudworth, Reverend Dr. James Ralph Cudworth Sr., Ralph Cudworth Jr. Well, he became a student of Cambridge. He wrote the intellectual system of the universe. Woo! That framework, who would have, anybody come from this gentleman? Who has the framework on life with that? And I'll conclude on what I found with that later. He also authored the Treaty of Free Will. Very interesting things, and the Treaty of Morality. And I'm just going to say this quote, just so we can get a sense of the philosophy that he was bringing forth in his age, not knowing the consequences of what would happen that brought us here today. Now, all the knowledge and wisdom that is in creatures, whether angels or men, is nothing else but a participation of that one eternal, immutable, and increased wisdom of God. To come to that conclusion, I guess there was a lot of confusion in the area. And if we know the descendancy of these gentlemen and the Vikings in the earlier period of where they're coming from in founding England itself. And so I went in a little bit deeper into his works and came across the group Cambridge Platonists that really created the curriculum and philosophy in having their children move into the Mayflower here in New England, and then later coming down to the Foreign Mission School. So interestingly enough, he was the vicar at Aller, Somerset, England, and I'm not going to read that part because that's continuous, but these are some of his legacies that he's left for us that are evident for me to find in 2017. And so this is my Hawaiian ancestry going around at the same time as the Cambridge Platonists are developing themselves, moving into their Puritan development along with the Mayflower again. And this is my lovely Tutu Kaue, whom is first cousins with Henry Pukaia. A lot of you ask, how are we related? He had no children. He had a lot of family. And on behalf of thousands and thousands of descendants of Henry Pukaia, we say aloha for taking care of him, by the way, as well. And I wanted to make sure that you see the connection with our last queen. They are first cousins. These are the children of these two, and these are the children of those two. There's more to this that connects our monarchy and spirituality, but I'm inbred, it's fine. So we'll move on to more now time and how these two have met and bringing us down to Alwini. It's not that far away. I'm 8 generations first removed, and these are my ancestors on my Hawaiian side who are prominent in their society as well. as well as my English side. Unfortunately, at the time of Henry Okupeya, I want to stick to that time period to give you a background on my Mayflower. Hawaii was going, the people of Pai'aina, or Hawaii we call today, were going through major turmoils in the monarchy and our social system and political systems. If I could mimic the PowerPoint we had at lunch yesterday in a Hawaiian context, that's almost the systematic formations that we've had, almost replica of the Native American Indians. So because of a power struggle amongst our own leaders, monarchs, Henry Okupeya loses his family and he's left with nothing. So he tells himself. And so this is Hikiau Heiau. In 1779, Captain Cook had the first Christian service on top of this heiau. And it was a burial of a shipmate named William Whatman. And so this was even before Henry Okupeya was born. Something was about this heiau. Heiau, the names of our temples, heiau is just a temple or a sacred place that we choose to congregate. The names of our temples change in different paramount leaders. So we change the use, we change the way we process. We were an agricultural, seasonal type people looking at the elements for guidance. Things were changing before he even knew. But I wanted to reflect on his eulogy and give a little brief on his signature. But he came to this land, and hearing of him, on whom without hearing, he could not believe, and by the mouth of those could never have spoken to him in Hawaii. The overthrow of the Hawaiian kapu system. A lot of people are misconceived to think that the missionaries created our whole entire spiritual religious system of Christianity. Unfortunately, we kind of knew what was going on. The mission begins with the first company arriving in 1820. The idols were torn down, awaiting a new greater God. Education was placed a high priority for both missionaries and the monarchy. And I believe that's what connected us when the mission came, and we were prepared to learn from them in God's name. Hawaii's Greatest Awakening broke out in 1837, showing 96% of Hawaiians were Christian by the 1850 census. That's only 30 years of work. In 1823, that's only 3 years later, the Hawaiian Association of Ministers and Churches formed and later becoming the Hawaiian Evangelical Association in 1853. In 1959, the Hawaiian Evangelical Association chose to join the United Church of Christ, formed by the Congregational Christian Church and Evangelical and Reformed Church, rooted to the Dutch 16th century. There's actually 4 different churches, but I kind of wanted to narrow it down with the 2. We have the Dutch Reform, a couple of different reforms, and different congregational churches that created United Church of Christ. Somebody may have more history on that. So from these things that are coming along, I just wanted to give you a briefing on what happened to the priests that were still in line, and then what's happening when we have introduction of knowledge and spirituality together. So we created a Declaration of Rights in 1839 and a Constitution in 1840. And we decided that no law shall be enacted which is at variance with the word of the Lord Jehovah, or at variance with the general spirit of his word. All the laws of the island shall be consistent with the general spirit of God's law. And that was a huge proclamation to people who spoke to everything in their habitation. They're talking to the wind, they're talking to the clouds, they're talking to the rocks, they're talking to the ocean, and now they're being told we talk to the Creator. And so that brings a lot of clarity for us. So in our clarity, our Haile Church in 1849, a lot of you folks are wearing these leis. These are made by the elders of this particular church. Haile Church in 1849 on the hillside in Hilo became the largest church in the world with over 10,000 members in a village population of 1,000. They were doing about 1,700 baptismals a day. Originally built in 1824 is a large grass canoe hut. Has anybody ever been to Hawaii, the Big Island? So the huts are common on the coastline. So we began with that. Oh, this is a beautiful, beautiful copy. Upon George Humehume's coming home. George Kamehameha is King Kamuali'i's son, that's the king of Kauai. I'm going to give you a little briefing of this letter. I got time, I speak well. Okay, so a briefing of this letter. George Kamehameha is sent by King Kamuali'i. King Kamuali'i is not overthrown by Kamehameha yet. King Kamuali'i was advanced working with the Russians and the Germans, and he had outsourced most of his work outside of the existing Kamehameha's reign. So Kamehameha's reign was very cautious of how they're working with Kauai. And so the women, our monarchs, the women were highly influential on the new king in creating our godly law. But at the time, Kamuali'i receives his son George Kamehameha, whom is also a cousin to Henry Pukaia, third cousin. And when he receives George Kamehameha, Samuel Worcester sends a gift specifically for the king. And so this is in response to that gift addressed to America and Cornwall, and to Samuel Worcester, thanking you so much for this gift. This gift was the Bible. This Bible laid the framework of the hope of our system that we would create to incorporate our knowledge and our spirituality. And I hope that I could leave a copy of this with the Historical Society so this can bring thanks to this community for enriching their children. On the downfall, a lot of you want to know what happened to the Native Hawaiian missionaries who left. The first mission, we got 4 missionaries back. Unfortunately, none of them persevered the way that Henry Okukaia's essence even made it. And so Thomas Hopu fell to the illness of alcoholism, William Kinui, George Humehume disgusted his father enough for him to be disowned by the end of his life. So things were changing, but God was there. And so, let's see what else we got here. Hokulea! Okay, so in all this faith, we built a canoe. We've always had canoes, but we built a canoe specifically to redo what our ancestors gave us the faith to do, which is do what is completely natural to us. So this voyage has been 100% completed off of navigational charts directly from the Celestials. And they reached home yesterday morning, and the whole entire state was waiting for them. I don't know if you guys caught the news in Hawaii, yes. But it was a huge event. So for us, in our charisma and our conditioning out of things that have been so treacherous, we've made it. They made it home, they went around the world, and they've made it home completely off of just what the Creator provided and nothing else. So a lot of times when we're dependent on something to get us somewhere, you actually don't need anything but just yourself. And so this has been amazing for me, for my journey in discovering myself on the Mayflower and coming through the New England to revisit Henry Pukaia, to realize what I carry and now to profess in my work. So as a burial site specialist, I manage our burial councils on our island, and I do the disposition of human skeletal remains. I almost had a heart attack when Nick brought up the excavations. In my job, in deciding the disposition of human skeletal remains, you have to mitigate deep in yourself on what you're gonna do, if you're gonna preserve it in place or you're gonna relocate. So I almost went back in time, but came back and realized we repatriated him and brought him home, which is why the laws were created, later on in the evolution of America, to give us the right to bring our ancestors home. Although, since I've been here, I have learned that this was his home, and I appreciate the generations of families who have continuously taken care of him and nurtured him till today. I believe it was some of your prayers and charisma that brought us here to be here to share with you that we're okay, we made it, and everything that you did worked. And that whatever we can do, we move forward into an invisible voyage. And so I would say, I don't know if anyone answered the question of whose mission it is. It's your mission.
Did you say that this is your birthday?
It was yesterday, but it's Father's Day 38 years ago.
So I think it's very appropriate for us to sing Happy Birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Melanie. Happy birthday to you. And I'm very happy.
I never got a ringy thingy.
Our next speaker is Mary Catherine Nail. Did I get that okay? Who is a partner in the Pipestem Law Firm and executive director of the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts Program, and of course, the playwright for the play that was performed yesterday.
So thank you all so much. It's an honor to be here today and to get to speak to you a little bit more in depth. And thank you to everyone who came to the play yesterday. I greatly, greatly appreciate that. And thank you so much for all the support. A lot of hard work went into that, and a lot of the actors who are not here anymore, who deserve a lot of the accolades and the appreciation, have returned home. So thank you. I'm not doing it properly. No.
She did a play.
I did a play. I actually have a lot of PowerPoints. I actually have like several on my laptop. But I think I'll just speak for now.
Okay.
And I'm used to doing PowerPoints, and I certainly have a lot of text to share. But I thought for just 20 minutes I will just chat. And in reflecting on the question of whose mission, I guess to be clear for those of you who may not know, I'm a descendant of John Ridge. And so John Ridge was one of the students from Cherokee Nation who attended this school. He came in the fall of 1818, and he fell in love with Sarah Bird Northrop, the school steward's daughter. And so and they eventually married here in Cornwall on January 26, 1824. And Anne Schillinger was kind enough to find me their marriage certificate. So I got to hold their actual marriage certificate in my hand, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it. And if you think about it, I wouldn't exist if Cornwall wasn't here, if the Foreign Mission School hadn't been here, because then John Ridge would not have met Sarah Bird Northrop, and they would not have given birth to Flora Chamberlain Ridge, who then gave birth to William Dudley Polson, who then married a woman who gave birth to my grandma and then gave birth to my dad, and my dad, who didn't give birth to me but married my mom, and she did. It's really remarkable to think about that. We are who we come from, and I think some of us may not know. I mean, it was really amazing to see Cowanoy's connection, right, to where she came from, and she can take you back all those generations. Well, we all have that. And we all carry that with us. And if it wasn't it doesn't matter how far you go back. You can go back 13 generations. If those two people didn't connect, you wouldn't be here today. And so it's with that gratitude for this community, which has created me in a way, that I come back. And in thinking about whose mission, John Ridge, if you read any of the writings from that time, his cousin was here, Elias Boudinot. And Elias did convert. So, and in the Cherokee way, he's sort of my uncle, because really cousins are actually more like a brother or a sister. And so the cousin of your grandfather is really your uncle, and not so much a distant relative, right? But anyways, Elias, another relative of mine, became very devout and accepted Christ and really professed his faith. John Ridge never did. And that was troubling to a lot of, especially the folks here in Cornwall, since the mission of the Foreign Mission School was to Christianize. It was, the heathen school. It was to Christianize the heathen youth, and he never accepted Christ into his heart. Now, myself, I was baptized in the Episcopal Church in Oklahoma City, That's where my parents were married. That's where we had the funeral for my grandmother. And, you know, I am Christian, but what does that mean? And also, you know, what does it mean to preserve your culture that is not a Christian-based culture? Cherokee, as a Cherokee woman, I very much believe in our Cherokee beliefs, our religion, and I don't see them as I don't think they're in conflict with Christianity. In fact, I don't think that when we pray to Creator, whether it's in Cherokee or English, that it's really any different. Now, we did not have a Jesus Christ figure in that story, but that doesn't mean we can't believe in Him or that we can't accept what He sacrificed with His life. But what does that mean for us today? And I can't help but look at it as a lawyer, because I am a lawyer. And, you know, the reality of that is, you know, and I grew up, I mean, I told some of this story yesterday. I'm watching my own time because I have major points I want to make. But you can still ding me if you need to. So I grew up with my grandma telling me, you know, your great-great-grandfather, John Ridge, fought for our survival in the Supreme Court and he won. At a time when the United States executive branch and the legislative branch wanted to eradicate us, the Supreme Court recognized our inherent right to exist as a nation. And to her, the Supreme Court was sacred, to my grandmother. Now, if you step back and look at it today, the Supreme Court today is doing more to strip our tribal nations of our inherent sovereignty than any other branch of the federal government. Now, part of that is just, we're humans, right? And you can look at history over time, and you can see different presidents over time, and maybe some patterns of things that repeat, ebb and flow. So sometimes, you know, different branches of the government behave differently, but what happened with, it's so interesting to see the letter to Samuel Worcester, and to have you bring him up, because Samuel Worcester played such a pivotal role in Elias Boudinot's life, and in John Ridge's life. He was a missionary, very involved with ABCFM, and he, through that and his connections, that came down to Cherokee Nation, and after Elias left the school here and went back to Cherokee Nation, he worked with Samuel Worcester to translate the entire Bible into Cherokee. And, but then Georgia didn't like the fact that Cherokee Nation, we had created our own constitution, and we had a Supreme Court 10 years before Georgia had a Supreme Court. And, you know, all these things that you aren't supposed to do if you're uncivilized savages, Cherokee Nation was doing, and doing quite well, actually. Cherokee Nation at that point had a higher literacy rate than citizens in the state of Georgia. So Georgia didn't like that. That really undermined their message about why Cherokees should be removed from the Southeast. The message was American progress. Make America great, right? I mean, really, right? We gotta expand our democracy, and these uncivilized savages are just in the way. We just need to, we're not going to harm them. Actually, Andrew Jackson would say, it's harmful for them to be here because they just don't have the civilization. So if we move them to a safer place, well, they will be more protected because, gosh, their white neighbors in Georgia are just having a hard time with them. We're going to protect them by moving them. But then all of a sudden, when they become very civilized, or they show they're civilized, they didn't become, they already were. We're ancient civilization, just like the Romans. You know, that really undermined that whole narrative. What do you do when your uncivilized savages have a higher literacy rate than your own population? Well, geez, that's not great. So what Georgia started doing was passing all these different laws. And one of the laws they passed said, if you're an American citizen, you cannot enter Cherokee Nation lands without the permission of the Georgia governor. What did Samuel Worcester do? He entered Cherokee Nation lands without the permission of the Georgia governor. So Georgia arrested him. They marched their militia onto Cherokee Nation lands, arrested this man, threw him in jail. And then they said, look, if you just sign your allegiance to the governor of Georgia and say you adhere to the governor of Georgia and not Cherokee Nation's government, we'll set you free. And he said, no, I won't do that. And so he fought his case, and Cherokee Nation came in on his side and paid for his attorney, William Wirt, the former Attorney General under John Adams, to take the case all the way to the Supreme Court, and they won. And they won, and the Supreme Court said Cherokee Nation has the right to exist. And Elias Boudinot and John Ridge were very much a part of that. They helped William Wirt draft the legal papers. John Ridge was the first Native attorney in the history of the United States. He couldn't argue the case because back then, if you were Native, Indian, you weren't allowed to argue in front of the Supreme Court. So thankfully that's changed today, and there have been American Indians who've argued in front of the Supreme Court, so that's wonderful. But then he couldn't, and William Wirt did argue. But the point is that Andrew Jackson refused to enforce this decision. And that was why John Ridge and Elias Boudinot signed the treaty. Now, how am I getting back to whose mission? Well, Worcester v. Georgia in 1832 was somewhat of a miracle. If you actually read Justice Marshall's decision, he goes through all the treaties the nation signed and says, the United States chose to treat them as a nation. They are a nation. They have borders. We have, by law, our Constitution says treaties are the supreme law of the land. You look at Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, treaties are held up in reverence. They are to be adhered to. And that's U.S. law. That's not even just Cherokee law. That's our own law. And that decision was never obeyed. But at the same time, you have to understand how that's like our Brown v. Board of Education. Because in 1823, just 9 years before Worcester v. Georgia, the Supreme Court had issued a decision in Johnson v. McIntosh saying Indian nations cannot claim legal title to their land. So if you think about it, 1823, John Rich hadn't even married Sarah Bird Northrup yet. That was a year away. And in 1823, the Supreme Court said Indian nations cannot claim legal title to their land because they're racially inferior, savages, and heathens who don't worship Christ and they don't know how to farm. And they don't commercially exploit the land. Therefore, they cannot claim legal title to it. That law has never been overturned. Now, Worcester v. Georgia arguably overturned it, but since then, the Supreme Court, which was so progressive in 1832 in recognizing our inherent right to exist, has retracted that and has basically divorced itself from Worcester v. Georgia and has started to go back to citing Johnson v. McIntosh. So in 1978, the Supreme Court, in a decision called Oliphant versus Suquamish Indian Tribe, a tribe in Washington State, said Indian nations can no longer exercise criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians who come onto tribal lands and commit crimes. Now, in 1978, when the Supreme Court issued that decision, the Supreme Court, every decision they make is based off some sort of precedent or authority, right? This is the doctrine we believe and adhere to for the Supreme Court. And you'll hear this a lot of times, stare decisis. And this conversation happens a lot around Roe v. Wade. Well, you can't overturn a decision that's been made. And, the Supreme Court has done that for hundreds of years. But we like to think that you can't. It's like, once it's decreed, you can't overturn it until it happens. And sometimes we celebrate that, right? Brown v. Board of Education is, thank God we overturned Plessy v. Ferguson. I don't know, I know there are probably still some people who think maybe Plessy was a good decision. But that's a different topic for a different day, although it's very much related to this. The Supreme Court can and will, it's an institution of humans, overturn decisions. And so maybe someday we can overturn this Johnson v. McIntosh decision, or Oliphant, which happened in 1978. But the point is that all judicial decisions, right, are written by humans. And they're based on a narrative. What is that narrative? What is that value, right? So Brown v. Board of Education is the narrative that we're actually all equal. No one's inferior to someone else just because of the color of their skin. That's a really powerful narrative that I think most people in this room probably agree with. I hope so. Now, the narrative of Johnson v. McIntosh is Indians are racially inferior because they're heathens, because they're not Christians. And that was very much the mindset at the time. That was the mindset that led to the mission school. And even though some of that was very altruistic, we want to save their souls, we want to save them, we want to help them, there was this idea they're less than, they are inferior, they're out there wandering in the wilderness because they haven't found Christ. At some point, as Americans in the United States of America, we will have to deconstruct that narrative. The narrative being that Indians before Christ were racially inferior and uncivilized and savages, right? I mean, that has to be deconstructed. It still is the foundation of the Supreme Court's jurisprudence in this country today. And that's very problematic for our tribal nations. So this Johnson v. McIntosh decision from 1823 that says we're racially inferior because we don't worship Christ, is the foundation for stripping us of our criminal jurisdiction. My grandfathers fought for that criminal jurisdiction and they won it. But for some reason now the Supreme Court doesn't want to recognize that. That was the whole debate in Worcester v. Georgia. Georgia said, we get to exercise criminal jurisdiction on Cherokee Nation lands. Look at what you said in Johnson v. McIntosh. They can't even claim legal title to their land. They're racially inferior savages and heathens. And Cherokee Nation said, no, look at all these treaties you signed. You preserved this inherent right, our inherent sovereignty to exercise this jurisdiction. And Justice Marshall said, Cherokee Nation's right. So really what I like to advocate for as an attorney is the restoration of what has been taken from us, the restoration of our sovereignty, the restoration of our jurisdiction. And it is a crisis in Indian country today. Our Native women are more likely to be raped, sexually abused, or murdered than any other population in the United States. The majority of those crimes, and this is from the U.S. Department of Justice statistics, just Google it. You don't have to believe me. The majority of those crimes are committed by non-natives. Now, the problem with that is that means that the majority of those crimes can't be prosecuted by the tribal government because of the Supreme Court's decision in Oliphant in 1978, which goes back to Johnson v. McIntosh in 1823. And which is that mindset, right? And so whose mission? Well, and I'm very thankful that we get to come today and talk about that. Because I think by asking whose mission, we can accept that Christianity inherently is a good thing. We don't have to say it's a bad thing. But the idea, which I really appreciated your opening, right? Do we have to be Christian, erase someone else's culture? Was there something about that initially that was wrong? And let's discuss that. Is inherent in the Supreme Court's framework today. A framework that I think we should all work to change. And because once we can change that, and once we can restore tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians, we'll have a very different landscape in Indian country today, where for some of our tribes and our reservations, the rates of crime are just sky high. And so what's happened is, because the Supreme Court stripped our tribes of criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians, that jurisdiction has been given to or left to the federal government. Well, try calling the FBI and saying, a Native woman down the street has been raped, will you come help? They don't care. They're out doing terrorism, which to them is much more important. And I don't want to say fighting terrorist attacks is not important, but there's just, our women and children are not a priority. And they've been cast aside, really. And it's our tribal nation's inherent right to protect our people. And that's something I very much believe that my grandfathers, John Ridge and Elias Boudinot, fought for. And that was their mission in life, really. And I think that when they came here to this school, they very much believed that what they were learning here, which was a very fine, very excellent education, that they were going to take that home and save their nation. And that's what they fought to do, and actually they did. The fact that I'm standing here today means their efforts succeeded, even though they lost their lives. And so, it's with that same gratitude that Kalanoi expressed that I come back to Cornwall and say thank you. And again, like I said, I wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Cornwall. So how much time do I have? 5 minutes. Oh my gosh, I can do so much in 5 minutes. What else can we talk about?
What can we do? What can I do?
Oh, I appreciate that question. So, there is something called the Violence Against Women Act. And that was reauthorized. Now, Joe Biden, when he was a senator, started that in 1994. And it's been reauthorized several times over and over again. And initially it really had nothing to do with Indians. In fact, Indians were entirely left out. But a bunch of tribal leaders went to DC and fought really hard with the reauthorization in 2005 to get Indians added. And in the reauthorization in 2013, 2005 they gave resources to tribal domestic violence and sexual assault programs to give services to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. This is the Violence Against Women Act. In 2013, tribal leaders came back and said, no, that's not enough. We need jurisdiction. You took our jurisdiction away, the Supreme Court did. But you, Congress, need to restore it. Because we have the highest rates of domestic violence and sexual assault in the country. That jurisdiction has been restored. However, there have been many entities that are fighting to strip us of the jurisdiction that's been restored. For instance, the Dollar General Corporation recently, not too long ago, it's a long story and I'll try to be brief. They opened a store on the Mississippi Choctaw Reservation in Mississippi. One of their non-Indian store managers sexually assaulted a young Choctaw citizen who was an intern, a summer intern in the store. When his parents simply filed a tort negligence suit in tribal court, Dollar General took it all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, arguing tribes should have no jurisdiction, criminal, civil, whatsoever. We don't care if Congress restores whatever. No, it is unconstitutional for tribes to exercise any jurisdiction over non-Indians. Now, different things happened. There were 9 justices alive when that argument was heard, and it was very clear. I sat in that courtroom. My law firm filed a brief in that case. We had 5 votes against us and 4 for us. One of the justices who was going to vote against us died on February 13th, 2016, before the decision had been written. It ended up a 4-4 tie. That's all I'll say about that. I don't wish death upon anyone, but that was, and I really don't, and that was a very dire situation because it very much looked like the Supreme Court was going to, the Supreme Court took away our criminal jurisdiction in 1978, but in 1981 preserved our civil jurisdiction, which meant that if you are raped on your own land, if a non-Indian came onto Cherokee Nation land and raped me, my tribe couldn't prosecute that, but I could file a civil suit and file for damages, like a tort lawsuit. But anyways, so there's that element of holding corporate entities accountable when they try to strip tribes of their jurisdiction today. But VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, will be reauthorized in 2018. When VAWA 2013 was passed, the Congress and President Obama at the time signed into law a restoration of tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians who come onto tribal land and commit crimes of domestic violence, dating violence, and violation of protection orders. Now, what they did not restore is criminal jurisdiction over any other crime. So if stranger rape is not covered, but dating violence is. And so the problem inherently in that is that we know that anytime there's domestic violence in the home, the children are also, there's crimes against the children. Tribes can't prosecute those today. And so that is, it's a trauma anytime a tribal leader has to see the violence that happens to their children in their home and they can't do anything about it to stop it. Other than maybe trying to remove the child from the home, which is a whole other trauma from their family, but they can't criminally prosecute the father, if it's the father, sometimes it's the mother, in the home if it's a non-Indian perpetrating that crime on tribal lands. And so VAWA 2018 will come up for reauthorization, and who knows what's going to happen, because it's a whole new world out there in DC right now. And when current Attorney General Jeff Sessions was in his confirmation hearing, someone asked him, what do you think of the VAWA tribal jurisdiction provision? And he actually said, I don't really know that it's legitimate. I don't know that I believe in it, which is very disconcerting. And so no matter what political party you belong to, I think we can all agree that our local governments should be able to protect us. Can you imagine telling a leader here in Cornwall, sorry, we're taking away your jurisdiction to protect your people. We're going to give it to the federal government. Good luck calling the FBI. Call them when you're upset and you need protection, right? It's just not something you can really say to people. Well, but it has been said to us. So we need a full restoration of criminal jurisdiction, of tribal criminal jurisdiction. And what we call it an Oliphant fix. That is to fix the Supreme Court's decision in 1978 in Oliphant. And that is something you will see tribal leaders start to advocate for in 2018. And so you can support that. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. That was great. And these are all talks that I think will remain with the people of Cornwall for a long, long time. And our next speaker and final speaker is Ryan Bachman, who's from the neighboring town of Norfolk. Did I pronounce that right?
You pronounce it the right way, but not the way that you say it.
How do you say it in Norfolk? Norfolk. And this wasn't rehearsed. Ryan has been working here at the Cornwall Historical Society a lot of the time in the last couple of years. He's a historian and a doctoral candidate at the University of Delaware. By the way, there's full identifications of all the speakers in the program, so I've been very, very brief in what I've been saying.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here this afternoon and for having me speak. And what I'm here to talk about today was what at the time was one of the more controversial practices of the Foreign Mission School, which was the use of human exhibitionism as a way for the school to show their mission to the public, and actually to a large degree for students to kind of show the public aspects of their culture and really kind of refute some of the more racist notions that these students faced in coming to the United States for an education. And human exhibitionism broadly at the time was defined as putting people on display for profit, and at this point in time it's typically native people, but as one of the previous presentations did show, by the 1830s it's becoming more and more common to put people from China, people from the Hawaiian Islands on display in cities and towns. And it's almost set up as a diorama where people can come and kind of supposedly learn about their culture, but it's done within a very specific context. And even though it might seem controversial today, and at least still in the 1820s, before it kind of veers into more of a voyeuristic character by the 1840s, it's seen as a legitimate middle class way for people in the United States to learn about different cultures in the world. And the Foreign Mission School uses some of the framework found within these shows as a way to fundraise and to spread their mission. But they do alter it in a very significant way from the established way that many of these shows are done. And this is actually from an editorial from 1824, and there's multiple instances of people at the time who see that the Foreign Mission School puts its students on public display, and they're especially uncomfortable by the fact that they're collecting money off of showing students, especially since many of these are young people. And despite the fact that this is happening at a mission school, many of the critics are actually members of other Christian congregations who see this as basically almost the exploitation of young people in order to, and these shows do raise, the editorialist here where he writes collect $50 or $100, they do typically raise at least $50 when they have shows of the students. And there are instances where the school takes certain students, such as Wu Long. He goes on in 1823, I believe it is, a brief tour of the Connecticut River Valley, and the local press in Hartford and Springfield see this, and he's dressed in his clothing from China, and the local press is, in some cases, irate and very sarcastic, especially by the fact that it's these missionaries who are doing this work. But the criticism is based off of the fact that outside of what the mission school is doing, at the time the mention of Indian shows is actually, it's become a form of popular culture, kind of educational entertainment. And while it's seen by some people as a respectable way to learn about Native people, it's done within this kind of new mindset of what we would call today aspects of scientific racism that are growing out of the Enlightenment. And specifically the idea that many promoters promote the idea that Native people who are, especially in the areas where the United States is expanding in the Southeast, many, especially politicians, John C. Calhoun is a major proponent of this idea. A lot of territorial governors believe this idea that Native people, especially in this instance, Native Americans are, to quote a lot of the literature at that time, doomed because of the encroachment of whites into their territory. And so a lot of these Indian shows or Indian exhibitions are put on by kind of this first generation of showmen who are basically a lot of times traders who have intermarried into Native nations, a lot with the Oneida at first, and then down with some with the Choctaw. And so these promoters kind of walk this middle line where they know what a middle-class white audience wants to see when they go to an Indian show, so they can, despite what they might see living in the Choctaw Nation or living with the Oneida, they kind of tailor these shows to appeal to basically stereotypes as a way to, in these instances, make money. And again, this mindset isn't held by everyone, but by the 1820s, this is actually a mindset that the mission movement really is huge force in kind of trying to refute this argument that Native people aren't endowed with the same qualities that people of European descent have as far as, quote, civilization. And the mission movement really opposes ideas like this, which makes sense as they are trying to evangelize to these people and believe that they can, through their efforts, basically that Native people are just as civilized as whites, or at least have the potential to be, versus racism such as this. And this is a typical advertisement for an Indian exhibition. And the programs for these were typically for 25 cents, which was based on it's always tough to kind of compute what wages are relative to today. But 25 cents per person comes to a pretty substantial portion of what a day's wage would have been for an average person in the 1810s and 1820s. So for a pretty substantial admission fee in these Indian exhibitions, audiences were able to go in and examine kind of scenes of everyday life from various Native people, and kind of at the same time there is that kind of voyeuristic appeal if you're watching people in Native dress take part in Native ceremony. It's a very private thing that you're watching, but at the same time, this is during a cultural era where, especially in the United States, it's seen as, if you want to be a good citizen of the Republic, it's good to be as educated as possible. And this is actually, Indian exhibitions are within a larger culture of general exhibitions. They display inventions, public lectures on Greek philosophy, this sort of thing, as a means to try and kind of educate the American middle class about the world around them. And some of these shows, really, the performers and the showmen latch onto this idea, this myth that Native people are disappearing and supposedly doomed to extinction. And this is an example from the exhibition of Ron Wadaus. And he is originally from Wisconsin and towards the East Coast at around the time of the Foreign Mission School. And he kind of, showmen and performers like him, they use this as a way to especially appeal to people because they're seen as something that's, you won't, as he shows in his advertisement here, it's something that supposedly these people's this potential viewer's grandchild will see or believe by the time they're born. So it gives a kind of urgency to bring in paying customers to really see this, these shows featuring Native people. And this is also kind of part of the larger American Romanticism movement that's taking off at this time against developments such as kind of the growth of cities, industrialization, new waves of immigrants, where Native people are often, this happens in books like James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans. They're basically turned into kind of basically objects that are perfectly in tune with nature and stuck in time, and they won't fall, they don't have to worry about the necessary evils of industrialization and progress. And students at the Foreign Mission School are very influential in showing that this isn't true. The writings of Elias Budnat and John Ridge, especially by the time they're going on speaking tours in the 1830s, are very clear that the Cherokee Nation did not need white settlers to teach them to come out of the moment, being stuck in the moment in time, and that they had been changing and growing for thousands of years. And this is just a typical example of what an advertisement looks for and what you would see going to a show such as this. This is for a native of the Sauk tribe, show was in 1824. And you would go in and you would see performers in native dress with native objects. And this exhibit was noteworthy for the fact that it really highlighted how these shows were it was kind of inaccurate for the sake of accuracy, giving audiences what they wanted to see. Shuiskinen was presented as this native person who had never interacted with whites extensively before. And when the truth came out when he was in New York City, the truth is that he spoke 3 languages. He had worked with native traders and missionaries since his youth. And the kind of scandal that surrounded the truth around his exhibition really highlighted how showmen really tailored their shows not so much around actual accuracy, but so much as what people thought was accurate and wanted to pay to see. And as far as the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions and the Foreign Missions School itself, how they alter these shows, they're very much, in this article that came out celebrating their 10th anniversary, when it comes out in 1821, they very much almost take credit for the idea that contact between whites and native people shouldn't mean extinction or negative effects for native people. And you can see that they basically take credit for that idea here, harkening back to 10 years ago when they were founded, and kind of their efforts showing that, no, these people are completely capable of coexisting alongside whites in places like Georgia, Mississippi, and the Old Northwest. And this is the famous kind of aerial scene of Cornwall. And every year, the school would have an annual examination and exhibition. And the annual examination would be held in the Foreign Mission School building. And then the exhibition would be held in the church. And the examination was pretty standard for boarding schools at this point in general. Students would get on stage and recite, basically show people the knowledge they gained the previous year, Latin, astronomy, mathematics, history, English. And then exhibitions were also not uncommon with a lot of boarding schools, but it was typically an exhibition at a private school would be a scene from Shakespeare or from another similar play, and would sort of be the kind of relief for family members and friends and donors who had gone to see this examination. But in Cornwall, the exhibitions take on the character, as the first editorial showed, they take on part of the character of these Indian exhibitions, which they take on part of the character, but in a very important way. They change around parts of the narrative in order to show that this extinction mindset is completely false. And the students take a very active role in this as well. And there's actually a pretty good amount of research done, sources on people stopping by while they're rehearsing for these annual exhibitions. And it seems like it is done between students and their teachers, kind of craft these shows very collaboratively as a way to kind of show, on the topic of whose mission, kind of show both of their mindsets. And as this portrait of John Rich here, you can see what they very well may have looked like on exhibition day. They were typically brought out in their best clothes. There's records from a tailor in town, Jedediah Calhoun, and every year students they get a brand new tailored suit in May before they go on to do the exhibition, which in the local press is another area of controversy because people are outraged that these students are wearing, in many cases, nicer clothes than they own. One of the comparative things in the account book is that they wear, I think John Ridge's suit is worth more than the tailored suit of the town minister who gets a new run at the same time. And you can see that this is from this account of someone who went to the 1821 exhibition, that really appearance seems to be more than what John Rich had to say, what really touched them, which for a lot of the students, I'm sure, is not the message they would have wanted taken away from the content of the exhibitions they did. But this is just in direct contrast to shows such as Shuiskinen, where people would come and see native people in supposedly traditional garb. this was a way to show, along with the content of the exhibitions, that no, these people are no less civilized or have no less potential to be civilized than whites. And the content of these exhibitions was often current events. One notable one that there's records from there's letters that survive from the time period from John Ridge when he's working on it, is a council meeting of well-dressed Cherokee students debating removal to Arkansas. And this is in 1820, and the exact content of what he says at the play or the exhibition are not known, but from letters at the same time, you can see Ridge passionately writing that as of that time period, his belief that still whites and Cherokee can coexist in Georgia, and his belief that removal is not the route that they should take. So for a lot of students, this is a way to get across to the audience how they feel about some of these current large political national issues. And it's also a way for the school to show that the students are capable of having these opinions and knowing how to deal with issues like encroachment onto their land. They're capable within their nations of handling themselves versus these white outsiders. And these exhibitions were incredibly successful at donations. This is the annual report for quarterly donations of 1821. And you can see most of these amounts are $2, $3, but from the collection of the exhibition, just in an afternoon, they make almost $50 in 1821, which comes out to a few $100s. Again, it's difficult to always translate that into modern currency, but these were incredibly profitable for the school as far as its operational funding. And this, again, the money always seems to be an issue that people who criticize the school really latch onto when they write about why they think these exhibitions are immoral. And it's usually a very surface look and assuming that they are these shallow, voyeuristic shows exploiting the students and not looking deeper and seeing that it's not only the school, but the students using the exhibition as a way to get their ideas across for what they see the future of their nations as. And most of the records, unfortunately, because they are so correlated with the existing Indian exhibitions that are going on, most of the surviving records describe the exhibits put on by Native students, but there are typically most years there was also an exhibition put on by Hawaiian students that, even though there's unfortunately not as much documentation, you can gather that it was the same sort of way of Native Hawaiian students showing these kind of supportive public that they want the role of the mission movement in Hawaii and that they're just as capable of white students of kind of reaching these educational and social benchmarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you to all of the speakers. And what I would like to do, if it's okay, is ask the speakers to come and put their chairs facing that way so that you can ask questions and they can respond. And my suggestion is that we go for about half an hour, and unless there's lots of questions and discussion still remaining at that point, let's plan to close at a little after 4:30. But if we're... Yes. If our stamina is still holding up and there's popular demand, we can go a little further. But given the heat, why don't we aim for seeing where we're at 4:30?
Eleanor Lane's questions from the audience.
Right. Okay, and I think we're open for questions. And maybe if you feel like it, identify yourself when you ask the question. Go ahead.
Kristen Nord, and I think Catherine, Mayor Catherine referred to the excellence of the education. Nobody's really addressed the depth of what someone coming to the school would have learned, what kind of proficiency they would leave with. I mean, I thought it was fascinating that many of them perhaps because they were older, came in with wide eyes, knowing they were going to take advantage of it.
Jeremy, could you either repeat the question or give the microphone to the person? Thank you.
I wanted someone to comment on the levels of education that were being offered at the school and what students would leave with, the kinds of proficiencies they would leave with. Mayor Catherine.
Okay, Ann, come on. So we actually have someone, besides our speakers, one of our great local experts who's done a great deal of the research that all of us have depended on is Ann Schillinger. And I'm going to ask if anyone wants to address that question. Yes, you want to?
You can let Ann go first.
The question is, what was the education that was given at the school? And I think Ann might be a good person to respond to that.
Well, it had a curriculum that was flexible by the student. Some of the kids, when they arrived, could not read or write. Whereas some of them, like, for example, the Cherokees, were very much more sophisticated educationally. So,
Yes.
Hold it close to you.
is this better?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I said that some of the students were illiterate, basically, when they arrived, while some of them were very much more advanced. So we had, in the foreign mission school, mathematics. We also had advanced calculus. We had reading and writing. We had history. We had elocution and other things of practical nature, such as hoopering and horseshoeing. Not something you would get in Hawaii, I think. But the people who put together the curriculum were always thinking of what was going on in other countries. And so there was a big mathematical, linguistic, Latin, Greek, sometimes German, a big range.
I'll just add that along with the academic portions of the school, the students were required to do agricultural work. And so they labored in the fields also. So they were learning a mixture of academic, but also working very hard in the fields that the Foreign Mission School had here.
One of the things that's really fascinating in Wulan's album is both that it demonstrates a high level of literacy in Chinese, which required a high level of education before he set off for the, to travel the seas and end up in Philadelphia. But also his writing in English has quite lovely handwriting. So he mastered that. But lots of the transcriptions, so for instance, the Lord's Prayer has a number of grammatical errors in it, or misspellings, or little mistakes that makes it clear that his capacity, and at that point he'd only been in the US for a year, right? So clear that he was able to copy better than he quite yet had literacy skills. I mean, had English speaking skills, which after a year makes perfect sense. So I think there's, what Anne was saying, the students came with an enormous range of prior educational experience and English linguistic levels. And so the school needed to be extraordinarily flexible in the education that it offered. But the highest levels that it offered were, in fact, quite sophisticated.
I just wanted to say that they were speaking bits and pieces of English in Hawaii at the time. We had a large merchant population in the area, so commerce was going on around us. Luckily, this school provided multiple languages, and it was fortunate that Henry had the Hebrew language to rely on in his translations. So he had eventually translated the Hebrew Bible into Hawaiian language and then into English. And from that, he had created a speller that we have evolved to continually use. And a few years back, we had started a master's and PhD program in Hawaiian language. However, the first Hawaiian language immersion school was named after Henry Pukuia in Hawaii.
That the students have
To speak to the curriculum?
the question.
itself and the effects on their ancestors.
Gosh, I mean, I don't have too much to say except that I think it was obviously an excellent curriculum and they got an excellent education. I don't know how many of you were at the play, but some things they studied Shakespeare, and so I always like to have a scene where John Ridge reads Shakespeare out loud, just because, why not?
Next question.
On that same
Just stand up.
subject, I'd like to know something about the instructors who taught. Were they from around here? Were they from Yale? Were they academics? Could you tell me something about who they were?
Okay, the question is, what do we know about the instructors?
I hope I'm not going to get all these original questions from Tammy first. There were Euro-American instructors. There were the principal, Herman Daggett, and then later Ennis Bassett, and various other people, some of whom both taught and studied, because there were quite a large group of Americans, Euro-Americans, at the Foreign Mission School.
A lot of them ordained.
Probably, yes, I would say, yes.
Great. Jamie, do you want to come up here? You've done a lot of original research here.
I was just going to add that the school in part relied on the Lancastrian model, which was a schooling system from Lancaster, England, to sort of provide working class education inexpensively. And the way you did that is you had students who had certain skills who were responsible to teach other students. And especially because of the language diversity at the school, that proved a very useful system here to be able to have Hawaiian students who knew some things teaching other Hawaiian students and things like that. So that was part of this education was also student directed in that way.
Yes.
I don't know why the foreign mission school didn't last longer. Was the whole idea, was it a mistake?
Would like to take the first, I'm sure we'll have several people to comment on that.
Is this something everybody in Cornwall except me already knows?
Well, let me say that our panel actually deliberately features people whose expertise is not so much on history of the school itself, but all the different threads that have gone out from it. And that's why we do have people who know a lot about the school, and
the school is not a failure. The school is not a failure because I hope after this entire weekend you've learned that there are a lot of people who have taken Christian and non-Christian beliefs and made them work for themselves and made them very proud and made them, I don't know, Vibrant, yes, thank you. Do people in Cornwall sometimes refer to the school as a failure? Yes. Is that necessarily true? No. But, it served a lot of different purposes. And it has done a lot of different things. And yes, one of the greatest things about the school is, students did teach each other. And there were a lot of unwritten languages, and they wrote them and they recorded them, and that helped people perpetuate, their own culture as well as that of a Christian culture. And I think that is perhaps the greatest legacy of the Foreign Mission School. And so if that is its only success, I think it's a great success.
We actually did tell those stories.
Yes. So, why the Foreign Mission School closed? Once again, go back to narrative. What is the narrative that we tell? Being a descendant of John Ridge and Cherokee myself, I tend to focus on that story, although I was really thankful that you brought up the story of Cherry Stone, right? Because the two Cherokee boys, John Ridge and Elias Boudinot, were not the only heathen students to fall in love with white girls from Cornwall. In fact, a lot of them did. But those were certainly the two most profound, notable, and I think you have to think about it on multiple levels. Here in the community, you have very much this idea, this is 1824 when Sarah Bird Norfolk married John Ridge. The Supreme Court says these people are racially inferior savages and heathens. So do you want your daughter marrying one? Probably not. And so that was just the prevailing belief. You add on to that the outside pressure to raise the money for the school, and so now all of these other dignitaries and important people, especially in the Northeast, who tend to believe, if you think about it, our culture is our culture. The culture at the time, the 9 justices on the Supreme Court were next door neighbors to the Timothy Dwights of the world and the other benefactors who would go to one of these exhibitions and donate money to the school. Well, all of a sudden they're questioning, why are we donating money to a school where you tell us you're Christianizing these heathen youth? We just see them marrying your daughters. Like, that's not your mission. You are, and there was all this written about when John Ridge married Sarah Bird, not even just in Cornwall. There are white guys writing poetry all up and down the Northeast Corridor about how horrifying it was that Sarah Bird Norfolk married John Ridge. And you have then 2 years later, Elias Boudinot marries Harriet Gold. So to me, it's no surprise, or it's not a coincidence.
Nothing's worse than marrying gold.
Yeah. But the school closed in 1827, and Harriet and Elias were married in March of 1826. So, and actually I thought John Demos did a nice job in his book, The Heathen School, of actually showing the donations that were coming into the school and the letters that after John Ridge and Sarah were married, just people very upset with the folks. But, the folks who ran the school took a lot of heat, and they were blamed for this. How could you let this happen on your watch? And so I think that to me is a very important piece of why the school did not last, and I think it's a reflection on not just Cornwall, but the United States and the culture at that time.
Excellent answer. Thank you. I'm just going to say, so one thing about the album is it's written within months of the Norfolk Ridge marriage. So when he's doing that, that's just happened, and the school is shaking from that some. But a lot of the criticism that blamed the school for setting up a situation where such courtships and love stories could occur seems to me actually pretty accurate. So not only do you have the nice clothing and exhibits and things like that, the ways in which the young men really were among the most presentable young men in town. They were really interesting. And one of the things that the principal said from the beginning is we want to be civilizing these young men. One of the ways to do that is to invite them into people's homes, give them tea, have them. It was in fact encouraged that the young women of the town would help in this project of conversion.
Hold that civilizing process short.
Yes.
Just below.
Absolutely.
Where they are good enough to marry our daughter.
Exactly. Exactly.
I want to add that First of all, these questions are still controversial in Cornwall today, and I think that's a great thing. I hear people debate the mission school closed for this reason, oh no, it closed for that reason. And I think that that's entirely appropriate. One of the things we wanted to do in this colloquium was to open up exactly the kinds of questions we're getting into here. And as you can see, there are many facets to them. One specific additional point here is that at least the Cherokee were much better off than than the people that they married, the two young men married. And there's a wonderful description of the letter home that you'll find in Gold's History of Cornwall of the Gold family visiting their daughter in Cherokee country and writing back saying that the family that she had married into could buy or sell any farmer in Cornwall.
That was a very good question, and it doesn't often get asked. So I wanted to enlarge on that slightly. There were two opinions by the end of the time in the Foreign Mission School, that is 1817 to 1826. There were two opinions at the ABCFM, that's the founding organization, about its future. One was, let's really do this upright and build brick buildings better than this thing that they've got there for the academic kids. And let's go for broke with this. The other was caution, and that was not only because of the marriages and the sexual attraction that caused all this disturbance, but it was also because there were boys who could not maintain their connections once they got home. And in Hawaii, though we don't hear about it very often, there were some of the boys who went back with them in the boats who simply returned, they went native, as though they were natives. And that caused a lot of concern to the ABCFM. But I think it was an inevitable change between staying in Cornwall with all of its support and staying in Hawaii with all of its support.
Jim.
Yeah, I am not an academic.
Jeff, stand up.
I am not an academic. But when you look at things just from a social basis, and it's easy to confuse the term student with these young 20 and 30-year-old single men that were up here. And regardless of the lip service that was given to social interaction, there wasn't any. There was very little of it. And it was tough. It was tough on everyone, and I think it was somewhat of an artificial situation that everyone found themselves in here. As far as the two marriages, it just wasn't talk around town and criticism about what was happening. You read some of the editorials in the local newspapers, one of the biggest newspaper in Litchfield County, terrible things were said about this. Terrible threats were made against the parents of the girls. And this was something, it was sort of like having like the perfect storm, and all you needed was a match that was thrown on it. And it was a very noble experiment, but the realism of it working out on a long-term basis, there were just too many things going against it. My thoughts, my feelings, and again, I'm not an academic.
I just want to thank you. I'm sorry. I want to thank you for the clarity with which you portrayed the characters in your play. And you had layers and layers of different pieces that were very, very poignant. And I commend your play to anyone who wasn't able to be there yesterday. I hope there will be a recording or something of it, because I think you, with the background that you bring, you really were able to eliminate some things that are very important.
Thank you. I
it on Google and YouTube.
I have heard a rumor that if you Google Cornwall, Connecticut in YouTube, it's the first thing that pops up. I've been a little bit disconnected from Wi-Fi around here, but apparently that is the case.
Richard?
Yes, sir.
Name's Chuck Lewis from Falls Village. Question for Nick. You had to blow through your survey with the green with your ground penetrating radar. I would like to hear more about that. Just one question: how confident are you that the Lutheran church that's there now does in fact sit on the footprint of the Cornwall Mission School?
The only confidence is because I couldn't find it anywhere else. I think to establish that would be to do some archaeological testing. That is to say, below ground testing. There's one thing about radar. Radar kind of tells you, yep, there's something here, but it doesn't identify it for you. There's what we call anomalies that have to be explained. And often with it, I used to joke with my, well, I don't know if it's a joke, with my technicians and saying, you're going to drive me out of business someday. Because the radar is going to be able to tell us everything that's below ground before, without the need for excavation. But at this point, anyhow, we need to do what we call ground proofing or ground truthing. And that is to say, to test those images with actual below ground excavation. I think if we did a series of tests on that side, on the east side of the church certainly, and the green, we might find artifacts that have been broadcast or distributed from the school, along with possibly nails and other window glass and other associated materials. But that would also, that distribution of artifacts around a structure can also help us locate the actual specific information or location of it. But if you notice when I put on the slides and I said, you know, Kellogg's General Store question mark, Congregational Church question mark, I can't say that those anomalies were in fact from those buildings or structures and the activities that went there, but certainly that's where the maps indicated those structures were where we got there. So, you know, until it's ground-proofed, we really won't know. But I think the ground-proofing can help us with that.
We're being encouraged to do that.
Thank you. Right? You know, any excuse to come back for more.
Just following on with what you were saying, aren't privies good sources of information?
Yes.
And there should have been a privy around here.
I don't exactly like to dig in privies. But actually they are.
Threw everything away.
Actually they are. Privies, you should know, privies through time were moved around the property. They didn't just have one privy forever. They moved them around. And so when they abandoned a privy, they would fill it with garbage. And the garbage is what archaeologists study. So yes, a location of privies or anything like that would be very helpful. And yes, I've spent my time doing such things. Yes.
The question is for Luca. I noticed that you have recovered the rooster. Is there a symbol about it? Rooster? Is it because you're Chinese?
Yes. No. So the book has a rooster on the front, and it actually has War of 1812 naval battle on the back, and it's a little paper-bound book that you could buy already like that. So in the same way that you could go to a store now and buy a blank book, and it would have Hello Kitty on the front or a rooster on the front. So that was just the book he might have picked it because of ways in which roosters were meaningful for him, but it was a commercially made blank book, and then he filled it with quite different imagery.
I want to add to that.
I wanted to add that in the Chinese horoscope, this is the year of the fire rooster, fire cock, fire chicken. I don't know how many different names there are for that type of animal, but it may be just for today.
Other questions? Okay, I want to just ask, is there anyone on the panel who wants to just say 1 minute for as we're wrapping up our time together in Cornwall, just to say what's in your mind or what's in your heart?
And Schillinger.
I don't know how much more we can express how much Hawaii loves Cornwall and how much Cornwall has taken care of Henry Pukuea. And I don't know if you know the effects of Henry Pukuea's intelligence and how far it has brought us. We've come thousands of miles here, and I was thinking we would have embraced the same things as the Cherokees right alongside, and it would be any of the descendants, not only Elias, not only John, that could have been any one of those, but it's being revealed now, and I only can give the most, farthest, longest, biggest thank you to bringing us full circle in 200 years, and let's make it 400 years and 500 years and 600. I mean, it's all our descendants, and we only can practice that, but nothing's wrong with starting a new foreign mission school here in Cornwall, Connecticut. Nothing's wrong with that, and we do have a vacant property at the end of the line here. If any bidders are here to support a new school in Cornwall.
Jamie has comments to that.
Live their lives in Cornwall.
Get a microphone.
Yeah, anyone else? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. And let's just hope that after all of these years, we have a revisiting of the time we've had this weekend.